said, Mom, Dad, I really want to get my chin tattoo. And they were like, awesome, we support you. All of my sisters were super supportive, and my grandmother said no. And so I worked really hard for the next couple of years with, revitalizing my language, being Miss Indian World or Miss WIO, Miss World Eskimo Indian Olympics, being an ambassador for our tribes, and traveling around the world representing our beautiful nation. Eventually, Grandma said, okay.
Identity. It's who you are versus who people tell you you are. Who society expects you to be, who your parents expect you to be. But how do you find your authentic self in all of it? My next guest found hers in an old photograph and a tattoo, a chin tattoo. For Native people in the Arctic region, the tradition of chin tattooing goes back generations, but until very recently, the tradition was not still in practice. Today, she's going to share how an old tradition turned into a renewed identity and a passion for the next generation. Inupiaq and Kiowa, beauty queen and badass, Marjorie Kunaq Tahbone. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And that's just not any beauty queen. That's World Eskimo Olympics beauty queen and Native Youth Olympian. I love the contrast of those two powerful and graceful things. But the pageant isn't like the pageants in the lower 48. It has to do with cultural knowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural knowledge type of like pageant where you showcase your traditions, your skills, any type of your how you feel about your, I guess, community's issues and things like that. And there's actually pageants like that in the lower 48. I just want to add, but they're not like the Western beauty pageants. Yeah, there's a lot of indigenous pageants too down there.
I did not know that, but none of them include a bikini contest, is what you're implying.
Exactly.
I think we're about ready to get rid of that anyway. So I don't think that'll be a part of it. But so how did you discover that parts of your heritage, specifically the tradition around tattoos, not just chin tattoos, but there were some other tattoos as well. How did you discover that was becoming kind of a lost tradition?
Well, I was fortunate to grow up in a rural community where we were constantly on the land, subsisting and harvesting from the land. So, just kind of foraging and living off the land, eating local foods. And I think that really allowed me to have this foundation of understanding where our culture comes from, because we heavily relied on the foods around our area. And so as I grew up and began to understand more of our culture and how our identity has kind of faded away over time due to assimilation and the sporting schools and things like that, I realized that there's a lot of beautiful, rich things that we had a long time ago. And, seeing them in pictures and, there are some revitalization efforts happening around the adults in my life. People were singing and dancing more. More people were sewing traditional regalia. And it just was so beautiful for me to see and witness. And I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. Like, that was my life's work. I was like, I'm just going to learn as much as I'm going to learn to be the best Inupiaq ever.
And so you felt that was your life's work even in college? Is that what you're saying? Or was it earlier than that?
Oh, it was earlier. Yeah, I was like in middle school and high school is when I really began to like just see the value of our traditions and our culture.
And prior to getting your tattoo, what did your mother and grandmother tell you about it? When I know they were resilient or resistant at first to even share about it, but when they did, what did you learn from them about the tradition of chin tattooing?
Well, it really started because my mom has a tattoo on her wrist that she did when she was a teenager, because she was going through this phase of like being angry at, us getting our language taken away and things like that. And she remembered my great grandmother, having wrist tattoos. And so that's kind of how the curiosity started with me. And so she shared with me what she knew, which wasn't very much, because that knowledge wasn't passed down to her. So she was very supportive all from the beginning. It was my grandmother who was the one that was the least supportive, and she knew some, but it was still that knowledge wasn't passed down onto her. So, I just learned a few things like, oh, they did it for beauty, or they just did it. It was just part of tradition, and that's kind of all I got. But I knew there was a deeper meaning. And while I was in college, I found and dug deeper and came to understand a little bit more about what they mean.
And what do they mean?
Well, the chin tattoos are very specific to the woman becoming of age. So it's like when a woman is ready to make her own family, when she's can be completely self-efficient and just do the things that women were meant to do back then, which is like take care of the home, sew, take care of hides, that kind of thing. And that it just kind of showed your womanhood back then. And so there's a lot of stories that are tied to them that go back into our origin stories. So how things came to be, which kind of ties into different types of tattoos that we have. So we have the chin tattoos, we have our wrist tattoos, our finger tattoos, thigh tattoos. Those all have different stories and have different reasons why we get them. And really, it's just meant for us to acknowledge this beautiful type of, like, I don't know what you call it. I guess a beautiful like ceremony of this girl becoming a woman and you kind of coming into, this new level in your life. And so when I got my tattoo, I got mine done by a machine in a tattoo parlor by a non-Indigenous person. And, it still felt special to me, but it just was missing something. There was a lack of that ceremony that I just craved so much. And I was presented with a opportunity to be a traditional tattooist several years later, and I took it because I knew I wanted other women to have that opportunity, to have that ceremony where an Indigenous woman does it traditionally. And so that's going to be the most, I feel like my legacy, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's something that's really important to me to pass down to other people and, teach others how to do it.
I don't think it's dramatic to call that a legacy at all. I think that, I mean, I can tell you're trying to be humble, but yeah, I can completely see how that is a legacy. What is the traditional way to receive a chin tattoo? It's not in a tattoo parlor.
Right. It's not with a machine. It's manual. And so there's two techniques that I do, but there's several that have been recorded of how it was done all across the Arctic, because that's tattooing was done all around the circumpolar north. One is manually poking the ink in, which is like a machine, but it's not rotor, like not a rotary machine, or I guess it's manual, right? So I manually poke the ink in. And then the other one is really kind of special to the Arctic, where they use a needle and a thread, and they kind of very gently then they put the ink in the thread, and then they kind of pass the needle through the skin just on the top layer. This one's stitched just in the top layer of it, and that's how. And they pass in that ink that was left on the thread passes through the skin, and then that's what's left. And that's kind of one that I use too, but not as often as the manual one. But I do love like its aesthetic. It looks beautiful. But also, like, for me, when I do like chin tattoos, I always end with that one stitch, a stitch at the end to kind of acknowledge this tradition that our ancestors did. It's kind of like sealing it. For me, it's like just kind of adding strength and power to the ceremony and the tattoo itself.
There's so much thought and intention behind it. That's so beautiful. You said this is something that the chin tattoo is specific to women. As I was reading and researching for our discussion, I read that sometimes two-spirited people also receive them.
Yeah, it's different and a different time. We got to acknowledge that we live in a different time than our ancestors did. And so, the use and on purpose of tattooings also kind of changed and adapted over time. And from the research that I've done, that was the case. And we were gender neutral. Like when we use our languages, they're not gendered. We don't have gendered words. And so gender is very much a Western construct. And so when we talk about like, the LGBTQ community, they were one of the most important peoples in our communities because oftentimes they had really special interests. And so like things that like for example, they would often be like the doctors or the herbalists. They would be people that would be really helpful for the community. And so today, when we look at that, we kind of we're raised with this different mentality of, female and male and things around gender. And so when we do these traditional tattoos, I try not to get clouded with those types of standards that was drilled into my brain. And so if there's a person, and personally, I've only tattooed women on their chin, Inuit tattoos. And so I haven't come across anyone of the male gender to have tattoos on their chin, but it wouldn't be my place to say no. It wouldn't. I'm just the person who does that, right? It's a service to the Inuit community to provide that service.
You said you try not to get caught up into the Western constructs of gender. Certainly, there are many Western constructs that are all around you. And there's a movement of people in your age group who are decolonizing themselves. Would you consider yourself to be one of them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that when I was a young girl, I remember thinking like, wow, we really need to learn our languages. We need to learn our cultures. And that was my young brain trying to decolonize a little bit because I knew that having those things, living off of our land and practicing traditions our ancestors did was healing for me and healing for my family. Because we have been through severe trauma in the last several generations of our family. And that trauma has really passed down, even though like I wasn't a part of that boarding school era, or I wasn't part of the 1918 flu epidemic that wiped out a mass, population in Alaska. I still feel the pain, like I still feel that hurt. I don't know where it comes from, but it's there. And, even learning our language, it just hurts sometimes. It like hurts to speak it because I still feel that shame, I think maybe from when my grandma went to boarding school, and learning, English. So like the whole point of just decolonizing really to me is just to heal, right? It's just to kind of regain a bit of ourselves that we had a long time ago. And so that's kind of my whole goal. And, I don't want to make people feel bad. I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. All I really want is just for us to feel happy and healthy and, thrive in our lands.
Well, you have to acknowledge what was in order to move on in an authentic way. In the intro, I was talking about who you are versus who people say you are. How are you supposed to find your real identity if you don't have the truth about the world around you? And so I can understand the process of decolonization from that perspective, and the generational trauma, those are real things that you have to unpack. Can you help?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that, most people have some type of generational trauma that's been passed down onto them, whether you're Indigenous or not. And so really, it's about just kind of going in within and figuring out how you can heal, right? And so for me, that was trying to learn our languages, trying to bring back our traditions, our tattooing, our ceremony, and that's what works for me, for us.
I love that. I don't know that everyone in my listening audience or viewing audience is familiar with the role that boarding schools played in the indigenous cultures in the lower 48 and Alaska, but I was hoping that you could help give us like a baseline knowledge for those that don't know.
Yeah. There was this, for in Alaska, I'll be very specific to Alaska because that's where I'm from. There was like this series of events that occurred in the early 1900s. And one of them, there was in the early 1900s, there was like a starvation period. And so a lot of people passed away during that time. And then the flu epidemic came in the early 1900s, 1918, as I said before. And that really orphaned a lot of kids. And so what happened then was, we had a lot of orphan kids. And so those orphan kids had to go to orphanages or oftentimes sent out into different families in the lower 48. And so I feel like that kind of started this snowball effect of us losing our knowledge on the land and some of our origin stories because a lot of the elders had passed away. And so that kind of was really like the start of it. And then the boarding schools popped up in Alaska, and that's where they had all the children come and travel and live away from their families for all year, all winter, whatever the school year was, and learn how to be in a Western community. So they learned English and all of the things that you would think they would learn in an American boarding school. And so what that did really is it really separated the families, and it kind of disjointed the relationship between the parents and the children. And in those boarding schools too, they didn't really teach how to be parents. They weren't taught how to be good parents. And so what that led was to the generation who grew up in the boarding schools. They had children, but they didn't have the skills and the knowledge to be proper parents. And so that's where we come in this generation, my generation, who's raising their kids of, I don't hit my kids. I don't try to yell at them. I don't do any gaslighting or verbal abuse, right? I try to avoid this type of thing that was so common amongst our generation with the next generation. And so, there's all these things that happened at the boarding schools. And, there's a lot of trauma too of sexual assault and abuse, mental, verbal abuse that also kind of was passed down to many of the people in my parents' generation. And so there's a lot of these things that are happening, and we're just trying to heal from them. And that's what I mean by healing from it is, they passed down some things to us, and now we have to heal and make sure that we stop that and, heal and pass down some love to our children.
Yes, and the traditions. It was your grandmother or great grandmother that was a part of the boarding school.
So my grandmother's time.
And she was the one that
Yeah.
was
So my mom, yeah. So my mom was born in a time when there was a school here in Nome. So she was able to go to school here, but it was still a boarding school. So other young children from the different rural communities came here. And then my grandmother was born when they just started opening up boarding schools. And she went down to one of the boarding schools down in Sitka as a young woman. And so she was the first one to go.
And it was your grandmother that said, "Oh no, don't tattoo your beautiful face," right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She still doesn't, she supports me by not saying anything. Like, I think that's the best thing she could do is
Yeah.
just, not say yes, not say no, but also like, she supports me by telling me stories that she remembers. And, even though she might not, believe in it so much, about how important these tradition is, she still supports me by sharing the knowledge that she has. because she has a lot of knowledge about her mom having tattoos and seeing people with tattoos and things like that. So it works that, sometimes that's what you have to, that's what I'll take what I can get, with, especially with the older generation who may have grown up, you know, in a time that was kind of rough for them.
Yeah. I mean, especially like you said, for the older generation, at some point you just accept them for where they're at, their state of mind, all of it.
Yep.
What was your mom's reaction, and what was your grandmother's and your grandmother's sister reaction after you received your chin tattoo?
Well, so there was this point in my life, I was in undergrad and I was fixing to graduate and I was learning about chin tattoos and I knew that I wanted to do it during a ceremony of importance to me. And so I decided that I'd really love to get it after I graduate with my degree. And I told and I knew that because there wasn't very many women who did it, I could count all of them on my hand who had them, that I needed my family's full support because I didn't know if I was going to get ridiculed. I didn't know if I was going to, get who knows, right? This is something brand new. I feel like, okay, like a rebel, right? I was being bad. Um, and so I knew that I needed their support. And so I said, Mom, Dad, I really want to get my chin tattoo. And they were like, awesome. We support you. All of my sisters were super supportive. And my grandmother said no. And so I worked really hard for the next couple of years with, revitalizing my language, being Miss Indian World or Miss WIO, Miss World Eskimo Indian Olympics, being an ambassador for our tribes and traveling around the world representing our beautiful nation. Eventually grandma said, okay, she probably seen that I was not backing down and that I was going to get it, but I really needed her blessing. And so I think after those years of work trying to prove to her that I was a strong person and that I wasn't worried about not getting a job, that was her big thing, like that I wouldn't get a job and that I wouldn't find a husband, right? These standards that were expected to reach or something. And she was afraid for me. And so I had to assure her that she didn't have to be and that everything was going to be okay.
And then after you got your tattoo, somebody called you. Tell us about that.
Which one?
Your great auntie, your
Oh,
grandma's
yes.
sister.
Yeah, that's right. So, I got the tattoos and it was just like all support, no negativity at all. I think it came at a time when everybody was like really wanting something um, like that to come back. That was strictly ours, right? That was ours and unique to us. Because I felt like everything had been kind of taken away and maybe given back to us, but we had to pay for it, right? Like my college, right? My degrees in Alaska Native Studies and my minors in Inupiaq language, and I had to pay to learn my language again, right? So
Yeah.
things were, and so this is something that was uniquely ours that hadn't been taken away necessarily. And so when I had gotten it, it was just this big wave of support. And my grandmother called me and I call her my grandma. She's my grandma's sister, my aunt, I guess, great aunt.
Right.
We don't, the family structures are different in Inupiaq. So in Inupiaq, she's my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
So my grandmother calls Grandma Sophie and she said, I want to get a tattoo. And she's the youngest. So she's the baby of my grandma's siblings. And so I said, okay. And I went to her place and she told me a bunch of stories about what she remembers the chin tattoo meaning. And then I did it on her and she's one of those grandmas that's, that's really bossy, kind of like,
Yeah.
and so I just remember her like being like, I put it on her and she said, oh, the old ladies, they have to have it thicker right here. And so I had to like make it real thicker, like, oh, they need to go out further. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to like redo it so many times.
Wait,
And
how do
then
you
eventually
redo a tattoo?
It's I put a stencil on.
Oh,
I
okay,
mark
okay.
it, right? So I don't do it just blind. I have to mark it down. So I had to mark it up, and eventually she was happy with it, and then I got the tattoo started, and it was just a beautiful ceremony, and we both really just needed it for our relationship and just for our family. So it was a really beautiful thing. And so she needs a touch up. Now she keeps calling me and says, I need you to touch it up right here because it faded a little bit. And I haven't been able to yet because of COVID. So yeah, that's the next thing.
That's so beautiful. Have you met other young women who've also been inspired to receive chin tattoos since you got yours?
Oh yeah, there's hundreds now. There's like hundreds of women who have tattoos all across the Arctic. I was a part of a Inuit tattoo revitalization project where we traveled to several different communities in Nunavut and tattooed hundreds of women. I think there are at least 300 women there, and there's this revitalization effort that's happening in Greenland,
Mm-hmm.
and then here in Alaska, there's several tattooists now that do it, and so now hundreds of women have them, and men too. In Alaska, men get traditional tattoos as well. So not so much in Canada and Greenland, but they do, but not as often.
I
Traditionally, I had to mention that, like, so traditionally there were things that were done, but now that we're in this new time and we have a new uh, reason why we're tattooing, which is to heal, men often get traditional tattoos now too, because the tattoo traditions, they always adapt, right? Just like our culture adapts, everything adapts with time. And so, we bring these traditional tattoos in our lives because we need it to heal. And so what we can do that because it's our tradition, right? Who says we couldn't? Who says we can't? And that's why I recreate ceremony, right? I had no idea how it was done a long time ago, what type of ceremony was done. I didn't have any of that knowledge, but I did have my upbringing, my foundation from the land. So I incorporated our seal oil lamps, our traditional lamps that we have, and into ceremony, opening this flame. It's like a small flame that the lamps were used to light the home, heat the home, cook. It was also used to create the soot for the ink as well for the tattooing. And so I incorporated that into the ceremony and invite the ancestors to be a part of it. We talk about intentions. We talk about, why we're doing this, the growth that's happening, and the healing that's happening during the ceremony. And so that's the most important thing, is us feeling strong enough, giving ourselves permission to learn that language, to recreate ceremony, to feel comfortable enough to adapt a tradition that we've had for thousands of years into something that we, need today.
That's beautiful. What do you hope for your daughter and other future generations of Inupiaq?
Well, I feel like a success already, with my daughter being born into this time where she doesn't ask about women why they have tattoos. She says, why doesn't that woman have tattoos? And so, she's already in this totally different world where she has this she sees us. She sees the beauty of our tattoos, and I'll say, oh, they're just not ready for their ceremony yet. Everybody has their own time because you don't have to do it at a certain time. It was done at puberty a long time ago, but not now. Now we get it when we feel ready, when we feel like maybe we've crossed a milestone, or we feel healed, or we need it to help us to heal or acknowledge our ancestors, right? There's different reasons. And I already feel super proud to have a daughter that's raised up, in this place where she sees, oh, why don't they have tattoos? What's going on there? And so it's a total reverse, and it's just really awesome to witness and see, and also to be a parent and kind of reclaim our parenting style. There's this new trend called gentle parenting that I hear, but that's Inuit parenting, right? Parenting has always been gentle like that. it's been, we don't yell, we don't hit, those types of things. We honor each other's feelings, right? We validate feelings. But we lost that, in
Yeah.
the transition of boarding schools. And so just reclaiming that too is so powerful. And I just feel really, I get, successful. I feel successful about it.
I think I would agree. As we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to share about your thoughts and hopes around food sovereignty and the issues around that.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to be on our homelands and harvest food from the lands in a healthy, sustainable way. To me, that's the most important thing to allow us to be healthy, thriving people. And we live in a land, fortunately, is still very abundant in all of the resources of fish and seal and caribou and reindeer, and we have all plethora of greens that we can forage and berries, and we're still able to do that. And so, this our rights as Indigenous people on the land to be able to do that is so important to me because it just makes sense, right? It makes sense that we should be able to eat local, to eat on our lands. We should have that right. But there's so much regulation put on our people. We have the most regulations on our lands in Alaska, in the United States, really. And so that's something that I'm trying to like fight against and ensure and hope that my daughter and her daughter's generation has our land so that they could harvest and eat off the land because it's the healthiest food for us, and we suffer from issues with our health because we at our stores they don't sell healthy foods like they would be on the lands. So that's another big issue too that we talk about, and food sovereignty is just a really important thing for me to try and learn and pass down to other people and teach other people about which plants to harvest and how to take care of seals in a respectful, healthy way. Yeah, that's really important to me.
I love it. I love all the interconnectedness of really everything that you're saying. Generational interconnectedness, traditions, and then incorporating and connecting to new versions of those traditions. I think that's what's surprising me the most about what we're talking about. But all of it is so beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you came on and shared it with us. So thank you. Can you tell the listeners where they can keep in touch with you and maybe continue to educate themselves about everything that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I have an Instagram at Kunaq, Kunaq. They could follow me there. And then I have a website, www.kunaq.org, which is where I offer my classes, traditional cultural classes. And I also sell artwork too, sometimes. And then, I also have like a TikTok and what's a YouTube and Facebook, but it's like, I don't know. I always feel weird about like giving out the social media handles sometimes.
It's okay. Well,
Just 'cause,
I'll link them so that people can find them. No worries. Thank
yeah,
you
I think my
again.
my YouTube will have a lot of like if they want to learn more,
Yeah.
the YouTube is going to be the one that has the most information on it.
Yeah, I think your Instagram is good for that too. Thank you
Oh
so
yeah, that
much.
too.
I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, of course, Brianna. I had lots of fun.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.